So again, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Siobhan and thank her for taking the time out and her lunch hour to deliver a session on the virtual assessment centres. And I suppose Siobhan very kindly talked to some of us on the Community of Practice and the Employer Community Practice Committee a few weeks ago, and we felt it would be good if the wider AHECS audience heard her. So just to give you a little bit of information about Siobhan, if you haven't met her to date, Siobhan is a senior member of the Talent and Learning Development Centre of Expertise in Musgrave and manages all aspects of early career development from the second level engagement to the multi-award winning graduate training programme with Musgraves. She's over 18 years of experience, including 8 years in the exciting role of attracting and recruiting and developing graduates. In 2021, Musgraves was recognised as the Grad Ireland Employer of the Year up to 40 intake. And so well done, Siobhan, and the best luck this year. And then in addition to this achievement, one of their employees, Max Darby, won the Graduate Employee of the Year. Also to thank Siobhan, this year she joined the judging committee for the AHECS Awards, so she'll be getting lots of hopefully paperwork to go through in a few weeks or a few days' time. So before embarking in HR, Siobhan also worked in a variety of roles and industries in Spain and Ireland. And without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Siobhan, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. I really appreciate that. I look to the point on questions. I am happy to take questions at the end or as we go through. I think sometimes when they go through, if they pop into your mind, absolutely no problem. I've no problem with somebody shouting out. Makes it a bit more engaging for all of us as well, rather than listening to me going on for the next 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. So look, when we spoke the last time with the Community of Practice, we were talking a bit around virtual assessments, and I suppose we just want to explore a bit more in terms of what does a virtual assessment centre mean, and I suppose it's useful to get an employer's perspective. I know for all of you across the network, you are so good in terms of upskilling yourselves and finding out information, and through different industry partners you get this information, but it might be just useful to, from an employer perspective, to be able to get a sense of how we prepare for these and to get us how we use technology, I suppose, both in the shortlisting process but also from the assessment centre stage. So as part of today, what I would be going through a few different items, which I'll go through shortly. But I suppose just to set the context for in terms of Musgrave, for hopefully you've all heard of us, but if you haven't, Musgrave is actually Ireland's largest retailer and wholesaler. We're very proud to feed 1 in 3 people across the island of Ireland, and we employ over 45,000 people across all of our brands in Ireland and Spain. And these are the brands that you see in front of you. We actually own all of those brands, and we work with independent retailer partners, particularly across SuperValu, Centra and Daybreak and Mace. You may not be as familiar with some of our wholesale food services, but we would have the likes of Larousse Foods, which is very much fine dining. Musgrave Marketplace as well is the leading wholesaler and food service provider across the island of Ireland. So that's a bit about who Musgrave are, and I suppose we've been recruiting graduates for many years. Where our first graduate came into the business in the 90s, Edel Russell, and she is now the Director for Insight Innovation within our business. We've had many graduates come and go through our business over the years. We've learned a lot from the process, and we're continuously looking to evolve as well as go through that. And one of the most recent evolutions, I suppose, we have had to go through is the introduction of virtual assessment centres. But certainly over the last 10 years or more, I'm in the role 8 years, but prior to that, we've been working quite a bit with technology anyway as part of our recruitment process. And for today, what I thought might be useful for us to go through is to understand a bit about the role of technology within a volume recruitment role, particularly, I suppose, in graduate perspective. I'm going to take you through how we would shortlist our candidates to get to the assessment stage process. Just a brief note about the technology from a candidate perspective in terms of the exposures that they get to different technology through the process from their side. Want to just reference how we work with a third party, a recruitment partner, in relation to all of the hosting of the assessments. And then we'll get a bit more into the detail of what a virtual assessment consists of. And our virtual assessments would have been introduced in 2021. As we all know now, 2 years later, we're still suffering the impact of COVID. We would typically do our autumn campaign, our recruitment in the autumn, which would be from September, usually up until November, when we do the majority of our hiring for the following year. In 2020, we paused and we took a step back to say, okay, how are we going to manage our recruitment? And we actually did our recruitment for the 2021 programme via the virtual assessments in spring of 2021. there's a lot of nervousness, there's a lot of trepidation, more particularly, I suppose, from our side, maybe more from the graduates. But I think that helped us to be able to set the tone as well with the grads. And when we got to the assessment centres by saying, look, we're as new at this as you are, so look, bear with us and we'll work through it. And I think certainly that transparency with the process helped us as well as we went through. But we found the virtual experience to be so successful within that first campaign that we've made a decision that we're going to continue on with it in certain shapes or in a certain format into the future. It offers a lot of flexibility from an employer perspective. There are some ways in which it can certainly be improved further from a candidate perspective, and we're looking at how we can manage that process now for our 2023 recruitment. God, that sounds scary, doesn't it? 2023 recruitment already. But we will certainly, each year, what we're looking to do is take the process and understand what's working, and then how can we build it to improve for the next time round. So if I just touch on firstly about the whole role of technology within recruitment. And again, some of you may be familiar with this, so please forgive me if you are, and feel free to listen and hopefully may still take something new, or but if not, I'll move on through this quickly enough. Technology, I suppose, plays a key role for us in recruitment, particularly when it comes to volume recruitment. So Musgrave would receive thousands of applications for our graduate programme. So it's really important for us to be able to process these applications in a timely way. So when we talk about the role of technology, there's different ways. So I think typically when we think about technology, we probably think about the likes of Zoom and the virtual assessment centres, but actually technology is present in so many different ways throughout their process. Starting from the very beginning in terms of how they actually apply. So when a candidate applies, they click on a link for an online application form, but actually that brings them through to our applicant tracking system, ATS. And that system allows us then to be able to process all the candidates through the various stages. We can set up auto responses, for example, when somebody applies, that they automatically get an invitation to complete the online assessments. And it allows us to bulk process candidates as well when we're shortlisting for the next stages. So it's really important, I suppose, for us that we have that system working well, but it's also a system that's unobtrusive for the candidate. So what the candidate sees is just a web form, but for us, it has so much more functionality in the background that is really important for us to be able to access as we go through that. The technology is also very important and will become increasingly important over the coming years in terms of minimizing potential bias. In the context of the Musgrave graduate program in particular, the way we use technology for our selection process is that we would do all our shortlisting based on our assessments, which is possible thanks to technology, via the assessment. So we actually don't look at a CV until we get to the assessment centre stage. So when a candidate applies, they're using technology straight from the online application to the invitation to complete the online assessments, and all of those different things are facilitated because we have the right technology in place to be able to do that. And we're progressing them based on how they're performing in those various areas. We're not looking at names, we're not looking where they're studying, we're not looking at their degrees. They're literally just processed based on how they performed at each stage on that. And also what technology allows within the recruitment field is certainly a greater diversity. And particularly, I suppose, from our perspective, what we've found with the virtual assessment centres in particular, it opens it up more to candidates from a geographical perspective. Typically, our assessment centres, when held in person, would have been held in Cork and Dublin, occasionally in Belfast, depending on the roles that we're recruiting for. And every year you'd have a challenge if you're inviting somebody from Mayo to come down to Cork in terms of, will they be able to make it? Different things come up. By having a virtual assessment centre, this has allowed us to be able to allow anyone from nationally and also internationally to be able to attend the assessment centre and to be able to represent themselves at that stage of the process. It also allows us a lot greater flexibility in terms of attendance. And this is something I'll come to later on, but unfortunately, sometimes we do have people who don't let us know that they're attending or not attending, and by having a virtual assessment centre, we can actually invite people the day before the assessment centre if we have somebody who's pulled out. Now, it's not ideal to be inviting somebody just a day ahead, but it still gives them the opportunity to be able to get in, and for us to be able to see a candidate from that side. So if we didn't have technology, it would be a really, really challenging exercise to be able to process all through those different CVs. And I see there's a question after coming in there, Connor, so I might deal with that at the end if that's okay from that side of it, because it's quite a technical question from the ATS, but I'm happy to deal with that question. In terms of the different stages and how we use it, So as I mentioned, the very first stage of technology the candidate experiences for our graduate program is they go onto our website and they click apply now, and it takes them to an online application form. That online application form is linked to our ATS, so that once they have it submitted, they then receive an auto-generated email. So we invite all candidates who apply to complete the online assessments. A number of years ago, we decided to remove the barrier of the 2:1 minimum requirement, which would have been in place. We still do require an honours degree. However, at this stage, we can still invite candidates who have an ordinary degree can still apply and complete the process. And we have had candidates who've gone through the stages with an ordinary degree. We've had a conversation with them based on the requirements, and they've actually reapplied the following year, having done an add-on year to give them the honours degree requirement as part of that. So certainly, we're trying to make it as frictionless as possible for the candidates when they get to this stage. So they apply, they submit, and within 24 hours, they'll get the email to complete the online assessments. And with those online assessments, they're asked to complete a verbal and numerical reasoning and a situational judgment questionnaire. We have designed all our online assessments to be mobile first. What that means is that they're very user-friendly on mobile, and they're actually designed to be used best. The best candidate experience is on the mobile. The situational judgment questionnaire is a bespoke questionnaire that we've developed in partnership with Aon, who are our recruitment partners, and its features, it's nearly like a WhatsApp conversation, so that you have different colleagues from Musgrave who give fictional situations, and the candidate has to respond to the most appropriate response that they think is needed for different scenarios. But it's challenging enough because they have different stakeholders interjecting at different stages with different priorities. So it's a good sense to see how they can prioritize different demands, and also the responses that they give, are they aligned with what we would be looking for within Musgrave? So that's the first stage in terms of the online assessments. Candidates who successfully pass the online assessments would be invited to complete a video interview. So our video interviews are asynchronous. So what that means is basically we have a platform where if a candidate is invited, they get their own individual login. They will then have the opportunity to go through all of the instructions in their own time. They have a practice question which will come up that they can practice with their microphone, with their camera, their technology to be able to respond to those questions. And they have a time frame which to complete the video interview. So it's typically we give them 4 to 5 days to complete that. So it gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of timing to be able to do it. We give them the first question in advance. So when we invite them, we actually say, this is one of the questions you will have to answer. And there are 2 questions which are unseen, which they have to answer on the day. With those 3 questions, they're given 40 seconds to prepare their responses, and they then have 2 minutes to respond to each of them, and they have 3 attempts to answer each of the questions. So there is a lot of opportunity for them to be able to put their points across as part of that. The final stage then in terms of technology for us would be in the assessment centre stage. So with the assessment centre, as I mentioned, we've been fully virtual since 2021. The technology we use is Zoom and proprietary platform from Aon, which is called AHECS, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the candidates will complete 3 different activities over the course of that virtual assessment centre as well. And basically we'll make a decision at the end of the assessment centre in terms of who's progressing to an offer or not at that stage. So what does this look like in reality? Well, in reality, our shortlisting process looks a bit like this. So as I mentioned, we don't look at CVs or anything until we get to the assessment centre stage. So the very first point of shortlisting is when candidates have completed the online assessments. So we shortlist on the basis of the verbal and numerical reasoning. We don't use the situational judgment questionnaire at this initial, for the initial screening. We do that at the final stage for the assessment centres. What we would do is that for those verbal numerical assessments, they have to get a 45 T-score in both verbal and numerical assessments. So they can't score highly in verbal and then low on the numerical. They have to reach the minimum requirement. And this is a 45 T-score based on a significant database that Aon hold of graduate performance globally. So they're compared against their peers as part of those assessments. So candidates who achieve higher than that, the 45 or higher, are then invited to complete the video interview stages. So after the video interview, all the video interviews currently, we review them all in person. It takes a long time. So there's myself and my colleagues in the resources team, we actually review all of the video interviews in person. We are currently trialing AI. So our recruitment partners offer an AI algorithm for want of a better word, in the background that would allow for a scoring of the candidates. We're trialing it in the sense that we ran it in the background for our last campaign, and we're now just we're going through a validation process to see how those scores align with what we would have expected from our own rating of them from a person point of view, because I suppose we feel from the video interview piece, what we do is that we're scoring them across specific competencies. So there are 3 questions, each linked to a specific competency that's part of our graduate competency framework. And I suppose we have experienced recruiters who are going through those and saying, yes, we feel that this person is meeting the competency to X level. And then when you look at the behaviors that are associated with that, will the AI then show that we're getting the right people? Or are there some forms of unconscious bias at play that may be affecting our results? So we're going through that process currently. I don't necessarily envisage that we'll have AI fully in place for the next round, for our next campaign, but it's certainly something that we're interested in understanding more about, particularly if we continue to experience high volumes of applications. So what does this look like in reality in terms of numbers? So I've just pulled out the figures for our 2021 campaign. So for that, we would have had over 2,200 applications, of which 1,600 actually completed the assessments. So this is fairly typical in terms of a gap. So you'd have many people who actually apply. Some of them may not receive the email because they haven't marked our email as safe, and it may go into their spam and they don't see it. Some of them start assessments and don't finish. But those who fully completed all the assessments, we would have had a figure of just over 1,600. Of those, 968 would have met the requirements from the verbal and numerical assessments. And of those, 692 actually completed the video interviews. So we reviewed 692 videos, and of those, we then shortlist for the assessment centre. And when we shortlist for the assessment centre, we do so on the basis of their video interview score. We look at their online assessment scores. At this stage, we also look at the situation judgment questionnaire and how they've scored against that from a Musgrave, what we'd expect from a Musgrave fit. And we would then also look at their CV and their academic background. Some of our roles, we will have specific background requirements. So for example, marketing, we will require marketing degree or significant level of modules in marketing or postgraduate qualification. But for example, our buying program or supply chain, they're open to all disciplines. So if there is an academic criteria, that will inform our shortlisting as well at that point in time. So typically we invite around between 60 to 80 people to our assessment centres, and of that we would have hired 11 people. So it's a chunky process. So when graduates, I suppose, may feel that we're not getting back to them in a speedy manner, we do try to do so. We move through it at pace, but there is a lot involved, as you can see, as part of that process as we go through it. So yeah, I think hopefully for your own understanding as well, just gives you a sense of the steps that we have to go through and why we have deadlines in place as well as part of that. I should say that for all the deadlines we give to candidates for completing online assessments and for completing video interviews, we have contingency built in. We do our best to get candidates to complete them. We send them reminders, we give some extensions, but there is a point in time where we have to just draw the line and say, no, we can't take any further applications at this point or give any further extensions. Hopefully that was of use. And what I just want to touch on now before moving to the next point is how the candidates will experience technology as part of that. And I mentioned earlier that quite often graduates may actually not mark our email as safe. And this is a challenge, I think, from a lot of recruiters' experience, because I suppose there are so many different protection levels now on people's email to prevent spam and things like that. If it's not marked as safe, it can potentially go into your spam and they might not receive the communication. Now, throughout our process, on our application form and on our website, we say, this is the email, make sure you put it as safe. But unfortunately, there's still a number of emails will go into people's spam folders. So if you are talking to your students, what I would certainly recommend is that tell them to look at the employer's graduate website. Are there any guidance in terms of the email that they're using? Do you know the recruitment email? Mark it as safe, and so that you don't miss out on that communication. We also have a dedicated support email for technical issues that the candidates may experience. So and that's managed by our recruitment partners as well. So anything in relation to the system crashing in the middle of the assessments, they have a dedicated resource available to them so that they can contact them and get that resolved. As I mentioned, the online assessments are mobile first, and very much with that experience to the fore. And really, again, from an inclusion perspective, all candidates really require from this is a good internet connection and a smartphone. which you would anticipate that the majority of students in Ireland would have at this point in time. So that again is fairly straightforward from that side of it. We do have advice on our graduate website in relation to every step of our process, where we would give them advice in terms of preparation around this. We actually have a link on the website that allows them to do practice assessments so that they have an understanding of how they can experience this as well. When the next platform, I suppose, that they're going to use will be our video interview platform. Again, they'll be given a user login for that. Again, all they need is a mobile and a good internet connection. And really what we'd advise people here is just take your time to read through the instructions clearly, use the practice question. The practice question can be used multiple times, and that allows them to check their technology as well, because what you'd find quite often is that people may be giving you a wonderful answer, but they actually haven't got their microphone working. And unfortunately, you can't score them if you can't hear them. So again, encouraging grads just to make sure their technology works, from their camera, from their microphone to their speakers, so that they can ensure that they're getting the full experience. But I would say to you as well, as part of the video interview process, we don't require that candidates have their camera on. And again, we've allowed this from an inclusion and diversity perspective. We're conscious that some people may not be comfortable doing that. So long as we have audio, we're happy to take the video interview from that side of things. We also offer additional time or require accommodations for anybody who requests it, and that's done via our recruitment partners. So anyone who requires that can request it from them, and that's done in a confidential manner. The final technology piece then for our graduates would be via the virtual assessment centre. And there are two different systems used as part of the assessment centre, the primary one being Zoom, which allows us to see and talk to them. And they then have a candidate platform, which is also used by the assessors for the scoring. So from a candidate perspective, what they use this platform for is to be able to read the exercises that are allocated to them. They can read the exercises, and then they know also a timetable as to when their next activity is coming up. That's the primary purpose for that platform for the candidates through the virtual assessment centre. And again, what I would say to grads is that we'd reassure them and make sure everyone has access to that and resolve any access issues at that point in time. So if anyone is going to a virtual assessment centre, advise them not to be afraid to speak up if something isn't working. What we don't want is somebody sitting there for 10 minutes, you think that they're doing the reading and they said, actually, no, I can't access it. So we also provide on the day of the assessment centre, we give a mobile number so that if the worst comes to the worst and internet crashes, they can phone us and let us know what's happening, and we'll do our best to be able to get them back online. So we do our best to accommodate and to make sure that they're at their ease as part of that, and all the instructions are provided to them in advance and again on the day. So for the virtual assessment centres, what I would say is that they can access them via mobile, but a PC is recommended, and that's from the perspective of being able to see the rest of the group on Zoom with the activities, and also to be able to read the exercise as needed, so they're not flipping backwards and forwards from things. So PC would just probably, or laptop would just be better suited for them at that point. I've mentioned a couple of times that we work with a recruitment partner. So we've been working with Aon. So Aon, formerly the company that we worked with is actually Qute, which were taken over by Aon a number of years ago. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Qute, and we've been working with them for over 10 years now. And what they do is that they provide the expertise and the knowledge, as well as the technology, for us to be able to administer the online assessments for all of our candidates. So we work with them closely in terms of the project. So we would start working with them in the summer to set up all our assessments, to ensure that the video questions are the correct ones. Is everything working in terms of the integration of with our applicant tracker system? Because again, what they will do is the candidate management. So what I mean by that is that they will do the shortlist. Once we confirm who we want shortlisted, they will process those candidates through the system, and that makes sure the candidates get the relevant emails and communications in a timely manner to make sure that happens. They've also worked with us in developing bespoke exercises specifically for our program, which are designed based on our graduate competency framework. We would have redesigned our competency framework a number of years back, and we also every few years we go and we reassess to make sure that the exercises are relevant to the market that we're working in today. I've mentioned that we use two platforms in the assessment centre. Zoom is one. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. And then AHECS is the candidate platform. And I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots from this from an assessor perspective later on. But basically what this is, it's a platform that will allow the candidates to be able to access their schedule and to be able to see the instructions for each exercise. And from an assessor perspective, it allows them to be able to take notes on the candidates, to be able to score them, and also to be able to view CVs and to be able to see everything again in the one place. And it collates all the scores automatically for us as well, and provides us with the ultimate scoring sheet at the end, which allows us to be able to see how candidates have performed against the competencies on that day. Okay. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. You're all very experienced and understand what competencies are, but I suppose what I just want to call out from this this slide in particular is that the competency framework is really key for us to ensure that we're recruiting the right people. So every aspect of our recruitment process is underpinned by that competency framework. So when you look at the video interview questions that we ask the candidates, they are linked to specific competencies, and all the competencies are assessed at least twice through each of the activities that they do in the assessment centre as well. So it's really critical for us, I suppose, that we have the right competencies in place and that our assessors are also very familiar with these. We're very transparent in terms of our competencies, and we have them up on the graduate website as well. So what I would say again when advising students is that so many graduate employers right now have a huge amount of resources on their websites. And make full use of that because that can tell you a lot in terms of how they can prepare for it. Now, I'm conscious that some graduates may say, well, I'm applying to 10 different places. How can I make sure I do all that preparation all that time? An ideal scenario we all know is that we get them thinking about these type of questions in year 1, year 2, year 3, and that they're thinking about these and they're understanding what kind of employers and industries they'd like to work at, and they're starting to use that research ahead of time. But certainly, somebody who is well prepared and understands what you're looking for can come in, stands a much better chance than somebody who's doing a scattergun approach to applying to 10 different companies and hoping for the best. And I find now that a lot of grads are more prepared, but we still get the occasional application for somebody with a cover letter for, I'm applying to Pepsi, and you're like, that's great, different company. So again, sometimes people care and attention just to make sure that they understand that the company that they're applying for, and that they do the preparation, and that they understand what that company stands for, and that information will help them even in terms of informing their own career path decision. I know all of you are all very aware of this, and I'm not going to labour the point too much, but really just want to call out here is that the competencies are feature throughout any recruitment process you're going to look at. And a lot of employers now will be very open to sharing what those competencies are. So it gives the grads the opportunity to be able to understand more about this and to be able to study that ahead of time. And even from your own perspective, it might be a nice exercise to be able to say, actually, you know what, here are some of the employers who are doing the competencies. Go off and design. I want you to go off and explore in terms of what would a competency question look like to explore that, and to be able to give some examples. So you can feel free to use those to do any exercise that you wish with your students in relation to competency work. Okay, I want to come now and talk in a bit more detail in relation to the assessment centres. So as I mentioned with our assessment centre, when we bring the candidates in, our assessment centres are quite small in number. So we would have a maximum of 12 candidates at any one centre. So if we are recruiting one graduate for one particular function, we'll typically invite 6 candidates to that. For larger numbers such as buying, where we'd recruit more graduates, we typically run 2 assessment centres, which would mean we're viewing 24 candidates in total. Typically, the conversion rate from would be 1 to 3, as that means that you're seeing 3 candidates for every one potential hire, and that realistically works out well for us, because what we do from our assessment centres is that we look for the right person to hire at that point in time, but we also create a panel. So what we mean by that panel is that the person that can perform very well, we'd be very happy to have them in the programme. Unfortunately, we don't have an opportunity for them at that point in time. But then if an opportunity does arise, we'll be able to offer to them. And quite often we will use that panel if somebody accepts the initial offer but then pulls out for whatever reason. We have gone to the panel to hire candidates from that. And this is important, I suppose, particularly in terms of the timing, because if you're making offers to graduates in December for the following August, there will be a certain ratio of graduates out there who are potentially in other processes and who may come back and say, actually, I've accepted a job elsewhere, or I've decided to go traveling, whatever that may be. And having a panel allows us to be able to go back then and to be able to offer and not have to go out and do another recruitment process. So that's why if we're recruiting for one graduate, we'll invite 6. So that will typically give us one candidate plus a panel, if not 2 panel candidates as part of that. So I think it's an important thing for just to be aware of that. While they may not be successful on the day, there are actually opportunities for them that may come out of it. We've also had candidates who performed well in the assessment centre, and actually based on their performance, while they may not necessarily have been right for that role, we have made offers to them for alternative roles within the business as well as part of that. And recently we've had that within supply chain, which is great to see progressing. In terms of the activities that we complete, there are 3 different activities. And again, we have blogs on our website, which give advice to the candidates in relation to this. I know I'm sounding like a broken record about the website, but I have to stress, we are doing our best to be as transparent as possible with our candidates and to give them every opportunity to succeed. So for the group icebreaker, what you'd have as what that is, it's a short exercise. They're given, it's the full group would participate in it. There's a 3 minutes reading time, and they have 10 minutes in which to complete the exercise. As they are completing that exercise, then the assessors are in the background, they're each assessing an individual candidate. So if you have 12 candidates, you have 12 assessors. And then as you go through, the candidates finish the exercise, and I'll go through the movements in a moment from a Zoom perspective, but they finish an exercise, they leave the virtual room, assessors do the ratings, and then we move on to the next activity. And so the next activity from our assessment centres would be a group exercise and a presentation. So this is a more involved material. So they'll get a bit of longer reading time. They'll have 5 minutes. We'd have a maximum of 6 people within the group. And they'll have specific objectives that they have to achieve by the end of that. So there's typically 5 or 6 points that they have to come to agreement on, and they have to be presented then at the end of the presentation. So they're given 1.5 minutes each to present their findings or their discussion at the back of it. The real value in this is from an assessor perspective is that we get to see the discussion and how they reach that decision making. Because you could have somebody who's absolutely amazing presentation, but may not necessarily have collaborated very well within the group. Or similarly, you may have somebody who does amazing work in the group, but just completely loses it in terms of the presentation because they're not accustomed to it. So it's a fairer playing field in terms of allowing them to view what the group the assessors to view the discussion as it's ongoing, and the presentation piece at the end. And then finally, there's a competency interview. And with the competency interview, it's going to be 2 interviewers. There's going to be 1 functional interviewer and 1 HR. So what I mean by functional is that if it's a finance assessment centre, then it will be somebody from a senior finance manager plus a HR recruiter. If it's from buying, it'll be a senior buying manager and a HR recruiter. We always interview in pairs, and typical competency interview in that we will have some biographical questions around CV and typically 4 to 5 competency-based questions. And that will, for the candidate's experience, will typically last around 35 to 40 minutes. And that's the full duration of the actual activity centre, the activities of the assessment centre from a candidate perspective. Now, I would say that this takes typically a half a day. So you may say, well, it doesn't take that much time, but by the time you factor in bringing them in, doing a candidate briefing, doing the activities, bringing them in and out and allowing for ratings, plus the way with the competency interview, because of the numbers of assessors versus candidates, there is going to be a period of time where you have some candidates who are on a break while the others are being interviewed, and that just makes in the morning a small bit longer for them. Again, what we have here, I've just looked to track down the candidate experience from the virtual assessment centre. So I appreciate the text may be a bit small, but hopefully it'll make sense for you as you go through. From the moment that a candidate is invited to the assessment centre, we will typically look to invite them at least 10 days before the assessment centre takes place. So we do look to try to give them as much time as possible. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we will have people who pull out or can't make it on the day. So we will have that flexibility so that if there's somebody who has scored well, who we believe that is suitable for the assessment centre but didn't make the top 6 or top 12, whatever it may be, we will go to them then and say, look, delighted to invite you. With the initial invitation is by email, but we always follow up by call, just to make sure that they can attend, and that if they have any questions that they can resolve, we can resolve those for them. There is an exercise that they have to do in the platform, the candidate platform, 24 hours ahead of the assessment centre, and just literally just registering to make sure that they can access it. And that's actually a good indication for us as well to know if they're actually going to attend. And typically the day before the assessment centre, there's a mad flurry of phone calls to say, you haven't completed the exercises, are you attending? And the majority will attend, they just haven't got around to it because they've left at the last minute. So for us, I suppose that's important, just to make sure that people are getting through and just getting that step completed. Once they in the invitation, they're given detailed instructions in terms of where to log in. We outline the types of activities that they're going to be involved in during the day, and we give them again links to our website in terms of here's some advice about what to expect on the day. When they log on to the Zoom call first, they're going to be sitting in a virtual lobby until it's time for the candidates to actually bring in. All the candidates are then brought in at the one time. These assessment centres are facilitated by Aon and myself. So we will always have a representative from the Aon team and myself going through that. So we will bring all the candidates in once all the assessors are on the call and all the assessors have been fully briefed as well. And that initial piece is just making sure the people are on, that they have the cameras on, that they've got the microphones on, can we hear everybody? And we do a quick run through from technology. We also give a run, obviously we welcome them, we run through what activities to expect from the day. I would do a Musgrave welcome, and then our colleague from Aon would go through in terms of what to expect from a technology perspective. That's more to do in terms of how they will be moved from room to room on Zoom. So the only thing a candidate has to do on Zoom during the day is actually leave a breakout room. Everything else will be managed for them. And again, we're at pains to reassure them that don't worry, everything will be, you'll be told what to do or you'll be moved. Just stay on the call, don't panic. And we would go through that with them on the day, and with our assessors as well, to be fair, because our assessors can be quite nervous about that as well. So that's why we work with Aon as well, to make sure that they're making sure people are in the right rooms at different times for where they need to be. The group, as I mentioned, I've gone through the different exercises there. So for each of the exercises, in the two group exercises, we make sure that the assessors have their cameras off and they're on mute, so that all the candidates will see on the screen will be the people they're actually interacting with, as in just the other students. The facilitator will launch the exercise on AHECS. It allows them to read the exercise. Again, we make sure they all have access to that. Any technical issues are managed by the facilitator. They have their reading time. They then go into their exercise. Once the exercise is finished, they leave the virtual breakout room and go back to the lobby. And they do that for the first two exercises. So hopefully you're seeing it's fairly straightforward from the candidate perspective, and that at each point in time when they come in, we'll be telling them what to expect. We'll go through it with them. We'll make sure they can access it. And then we allow them the time to do what they need to do. And then they're taken back into the virtual lobby again. When it comes to the competency-based interview, once the assessors are ready to meet with them, then the candidate is brought back in, brought into the virtual interview room with them, and they go through that interview. And once they finish that, they then go back. They leave that virtual room, and then at the end of that is a debriefing call. So that debriefing call is with myself, and that's going through the next stages. We're very upfront with the candidates at the very beginning to say, look, there are three potential outcomes from our assessment centres. One is that you're hired. The second one is that you're a panel candidate, or the third one is you're not successful on this occasion. And we offer feedback calls we communicate the outcome to all of our candidates by phone, and we would also offer them a feedback report as well at the end of it. Once all the candidates are finished on the process, we then have an assessor peer review. So as we've been going through the process, the assessors have been rating them, and we then have a discussion at the end once we see the overall scores to say, okay, who are the top candidates? Do we agree with those ratings? And the important thing as well is that they meet our values. So if they don't, they can score highly, but if they don't meet our values, they're not a hire. And that's a really important aspect for us as we go through their process. And we have had people who scored highly, but actually on the day we've had the discussion and we feel that there's other evidence coming through as well. And we just make sure that we're confident with the people that we are hiring. And as I mentioned, then the candidates are informed of the outcome by phone call. If we're making an offer, we'll typically do it within 48 hours. And then for all the others, we'll typically wait up 2 weeks, because we need to get through the process of references, medicals for the successful offers before we can progress the other outcomes. And also, we're typically making these as assessment centres are ongoing. So it's just a really crazy period of time where you're trying to get all these communications done. Okay, from a time perspective, we're doing okay. We're at 44, so I hopefully get through the next few slides quickly enough. As I said, you will have all these slides, so feel free to be able to read through all of these in your own time as well afterwards. I'm not going to labour this point too much, but I just want to really, I do want to call out that all of our assessors on the day, firstly, they're all accompanied by an experienced recruiter from our HR or resourcing teams. And then for our functional managers as well, the vast majority will have done recruitment at some point in their careers, and we go as senior as we can with our managers to make sure that we're looking at the potential and we're not looking at somebody who could just come in and do the job from a more transactional level as part of that. As part of the training for assessors, what we do is just make sure that they're comfortable using the AHECS system themselves. We do that training with them 2 weeks or so before the assessment centre. We have a Zoom call with Aon. We go through all of the training with them. we go step by step. They have demo access so they can familiarize themselves with it. But the important piece as well is that they go through the ORCE process, which is how to observe and record what they're seeing on the day from the assessments, and then how do they classify and evaluate the evidence that they're seeing to be able to make a decision. That's just a snapshot of the assessor manual that we have. We have quite a detailed manual that we provide to our assessors, and you can see that we go into quite a bit of detail in terms of how they rate them, participant instructions, the assessor instructions for each of the exercise, and the assessors have this to hand as well. And they found they can. Some of them will use it like gospel, other people less so, but it's a resource that they have if they have a question about any of the ratings or that. As part of the assessor role, really what they're there for is to ensure that they're there to observe the candidate, to make sure that they're meeting the competencies that we've set out, and that at the end of the day, we're getting somebody who has potentially become a leader within our business. Now that screen is a bit blurry here, so I apologize for that. But basically what this is, it's a screenshot from AHECS from an assessor perspective, which just sets out, you can see there that you've got some timings at the side, you've got the group icebreaker, you've got the group exercise, and you've competency-based interview. So each assessor will have 4 candidates. What they'll have is 1 candidate for the icebreaker, they'll have 1 candidate for the group exercise, and they'll have 2 candidates for competency-based interview. So they'll actually do 2 interviews typically. So that gives one assessor visibility across 4 different candidates for 4 different exercises, which again gives you diversity in terms of the range of the scoring from that. And as they go through, they use the system to be able to observe and record. So as the candidates are doing their discussion groups or their interviews, literally what the assessor is doing are typing down here what the candidate is saying or doing. And that's to be able to make a note, okay, if there's a group discussion and they haven't spoken for the first 10 minutes, then we just make a note, first spoke at 11 minutes, for example. And if there's any particular strengths or that they're observing in terms of really bringing good ideas or making notes, then they can make a note of those here. We would then move to the classify and evaluate stage. And again, it could be a bit blurry, but what you see here are just the different competencies we assess under each of the activities. So you can see in our group exercise, we assess 5 different competencies. In the icebreaker, we assess 4 different competencies, and they're duplicated across that. So each of the assessors will enter in a rating for their candidates from that they're scoring across each activity. And this gives you just a sense of what we look at. So we have positive and negative behaviors for each of the competencies. And you can see down the side for this one here that you've got creative thinking, initiative, effective communication, and constructive teamwork. The assessor has to rate all of those from a scale of 1 to 7. 4 is the minimum requirement that we'd look for the Musgrave graduate program, 7 being excellent. So I'm just conscious of time, so hopefully that made sense to you, but I just wanted to call out a couple of some common candidate pitfalls that we see from an assessment piece in general. And you see a lot of, I know I was writing this and I'm saying like a lot of negatives here as part of this, but it's usually a failure to do something, and they can end up in nearly deselecting themselves as part of this process. So first and foremost is, I would say, not marking the recruitment email as safe. And by not doing that, then they could potentially miss out on communications as part of that. As I said, we call it out multiple times on the website throughout the process. We've done LinkedIn posts about it just to make sure that people have done it. We will still get people who don't mark it as safe, and that will ultimately end up in there missing out on information. As I say, we have contingencies within our timeframes, but once it gets past a certain date, we can't offer any extension as part of that. Failing to test our microphone or speakers. It's less common now, but certainly it is still an issue for some people. So basic things like just checking things like that are really important for them. Not completing the exercise within the timeframes. I completely appreciate that if they're in several processes and they're doing coursework, it's difficult to find time to be able to complete these exercises. But we can't progress them unless they're completing a particular stage. So again, there's probably a piece here for the candidates to reflect in terms of, well, how many programs am I applying to, and am I applying to the right ones for where I want to be, and then being really clear in terms of what's required as part of that process. And that again goes back to the employer's website to say, okay, what are they setting out those guidelines? Failing to accept or decline the invitation. Again, you'd have some people like, oh yeah, sure, I'm coming to that. And it's like, well, could you let us know? Or no, I'm actually not going because I've accepted a job elsewhere. And completely understandable. I appreciate people have busy lives, but it leaves an impression as well, just for them to be able to do that. Biggest one is not availing of resources. There's so much information on the graduate website. There's so many resources with yourselves, and just not taking advantage of that. It's there's not much you can do about it. You can, and I know you guys are saying until you're blue in the face, but there's always so much you can do to be able to help them as to go through that process. But it's just understanding that we do our best from an employer perspective to give them as much information as possible. And a really important one for the assessment centre piece, and we call this out at the beginning of every single assessment centre, is that we can only assess you based on the evidence of what we see in the day. You could have an amazing CV, but if you don't speak up in any of the group exercises, you could do a stunning interview, but you're rated across 3 exercises. So it's really important, I suppose, for people to participate in whatever shape or form they feel they can do that, because we can't assess you if you're not talking. So it really comes back to the evidence that we see on the day. And we stress that so many times, and a lot of people take it on board. Unfortunately, we have some who don't. And you have to go back with feedback saying, we had nothing to assess. If you didn't participate, we can't assess your contributions. And I'll stop there, if that's okay. And I know that Connor did have a question there, Angela, didn't he?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Siobhan, thanks a million. That was very informative, very interesting, and thanks for the detail. And it certainly will help us in our work with students and graduates. Yeah, Connor had a question there. Does your ATS block candidates from applying to multiple times for different roles? And can you see it actually, Siobhan?
Yeah,
and does
yeah,
the
no. Yeah, I can read it there. So
thanks, Connor.
No, it doesn't block multiple applications. I would encourage graduates not to put in multiple applications for the same role. So again, and I suppose I appreciate it can be confusing. We try to clarify it as much as possible. So for our roles, we hire specific streams. So with buying, marketing, trading, finance, and sometimes you will get candidates who will apply because they're interested in anything. They'll put in a couple of applications and they'll put trading as first choice, then marketing, and then the next application will be IT. And all that's going to do is give them two sets of online assessments to complete. So we're not blocking them from with the same email or things like that. What I would say to anybody, and we call it out, is that if there are multiple streams that you're interested in, you do need to narrow it down, because an employer is typically only going to look at your top stream. And the only reason we look at the second stream is that if they're not qualified from an academic background for their first choice. So if, for example, you had somebody who's applied for an IT role as their first choice, and then they've gone for buying as their second choice, if they don't have an IT academic background, they're not going to be considered for their first choice because they don't meet that criteria. So we then consider it from buying, if that makes sense. Our ATS doesn't typically, it does support a number of different formats of CVs. It will take PDF, it'll take Word, it'll take the Apple equivalent of it. My advice for any grad would be it is best to do it in PDF, because some ATS systems can change the format of some Word documents if it's not done. So if at all possible, PDF format, it's safer to make sure that it keeps their CV in the format in which they want to present it.
That's brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks, Connor. I just wonder, are there any other questions? If you want to put in the chat box, or if you want to kind of get involved, just feel free to try, to ask a question. Yes, so some nice comments there coming in. Thank you, Michael. Fantastic presentation, really impressive. Sean, and I say great team with Aon. Yes, so there's some nice messages thanking you. And you said on, the virtual element for a lot of recruitment or a lot of organisations is probably going to stay in some shape or form in the future. So it's good to have this,
I think it will. I mean, for us, certainly, there's a lot of benefits to doing it virtually. I think the missing piece for us at the moment is probably the kind of the cultural insight to Musgrave. So it's that piece if you get to go to the office or the sites to be able to get an experience and see people in person. So we're looking at how we can offer that to them in addition to the virtual assessment centres for the future. So I think for anything, that's probably the gap that we have right now in terms of that candidate experience. But otherwise, it gives us a lot of efficiencies there. I see someone has their hand up. Aisling, is it?
Yeah, thanks, Aisling. Yeah.
Hi, Siobhan. Thanks a million again. Lovely to see you, and a really informative presentation. And just to echo the sentiments that people have given. Just a quick one, Siobhan. I noticed there was a big drop, obviously, from the video interviews to the assessment centres, and you've taken about 11.5% of candidates through. Was there particular things there? Was it just based on the video interview, or did you bring in some other factors? And was there
Yeah, so that shortlisting piece from the video interviews to the assessment centre. So there's a number of factors taken into account. So we look at the video interview scores, we look at their online assessment performance, we look at the situational judgment questionnaire as well. We look at their CV, and we look at their academic background. So all of those come into account, and we also look at obviously the stream that they're applying to. So where we may consider somebody with a lower score would be if we don't have a large number of applications for a particular stream, for example. So if we had low numbers for supply chain and we know that we're going to need more diversity, but then we may consider looking at a lower threshold for the online assessments. But typically, I suppose what we would do is we factor in all those criteria. We look at the shortlisting process. It's involved, but it's important for us, I suppose, to get the right people to make sure that it's meeting their requirements as well.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, I thought, and sorry, you'd mentioned that in the presentation, I'd kind of missed that, was that at that video interview stage. So no, that's really useful. I think we're trying to all work with asynchronous interviews and upskill students on that before they come across it at recruitment stage. So thanks for that, Siobhan.
No problem. My advice to them on that would be just, again, the majority of platforms will give them a practice opportunity. Take the practice opportunity. And the other piece is that with the asynchronous interviews, you will have a time limit. We're not saying you have to talk for the full 2 minutes, but if you're stopping talking after 15 seconds, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're not giving yourself enough time to be able to give a good answer to a competency question. So unless they're absolutely amazing that they can do it in 15 seconds. So my advice to them would be, use the time in the most efficient way possible to be able to get their point across. But again, practice. And again, if use the employer website to say, do they give you information about the competencies that they're looking for? Okay, can you then think about examples of when you've done that in the past?
Thanks, absolutely. Thank you. We feel your pain.
I'm sure you guys feel it a lot more as well as part of that. I know myself from coming in doing presentations that you guys can be telling these things until you're blue in the face, and then there's like an employer says it, and it's like, oh, the first time hearing this. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so just before we let Siobhan go and get her own lunch, and just wonder, are there any more questions from anybody? Or there's lovely comments coming in, Siobhan, and excellent presentation, great details. So thanks very much, and very informative, really helpful. Yeah, so well done.
Thank you for having me. And I'm one of these people that I was going through and I spotted a typo on one of my slides, so I must go back and correct that before I send it on to you.
You put that in for our attention to detail, Siobhan. That was set up. I did that on purpose.
That was it, exactly. So look, what I would say to you, look, I know many of you on the call, and hopefully those of you doing recordings, but if anyone does ever want to reach out to me or want to understand a bit more, feel free to do so. You have my details, connect to me on LinkedIn, whichever you feel is most appropriate. We're happy to work with you, because look, we're all working for the same thing. We want to do the right things for the graduates and give them the best opportunity. If there's any questions and particularly those people who are listening to the recording, if there's anything from the slides that doesn't make sense, then happy to answer any questions that they may have.
That's great. Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thanks to everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Caroline for organising it all for us as well. So thanks a million. Have a nice St. Patrick's Day and a long weekend. Take care.
You too. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.